What perception which became the reality? And then if you read the kit inspections of wow, cleaning there,
Hello, excuse me. Are you the one playing the music?
Charlie, are you beginning?
this DVD, when I first did live watches, genuinely the same we are satisfied with the democratic experience. Yes, there are still some challenges, but on that side, so far, so good. As I'm sure the presentation, I think one of the areas in which I think they don't see when they get hard is on the around expectations. Because if you look at the survey results, that's about how well we trust our institutions, that the message coming through seems to suggest that so that's one area. Elections generally the effect and possibility yes, as I'm sure the presentation. But again, their sentiment also comes through that says that they work more to solidify governance outcomes that have some challenges. The biggest thing coming out is the most important problem with government so 24 years later, yes, some good things, a lot of good things can happen, some real challenges as well, but that's always the issue of democratization. It takes time to solidify. On the issue of yes, I share that sentiment. So I come at this as an institution, just where I say, for instance, your key institutions like the Electoral Commission, the Office of the President's Parliament, all those institutions that are charged with solving and addressing our everyday public problems, that you need to make sure that they are strong enough that at the end of the day, citizens walk away from these institutions with a sense of confidence that okay, the problem is addressed. Even in cases where the institution doesn't play the role that you were hoping for, you can still hopefully say it was treated that is the way
So let's use the what the so we do this graph. Based on
No, I think this one.
Sense to you to look at indicators, come to a conclusion. As a voter, condition,
Is it turned on?
legitimate means of calculating what is
Kahelo.
so encouraging. Sync. Volume, please. Mike. Operator.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
Good afternoon.
All protocol observed. I have the distinct pleasure of introducing to you today the Speaker for Public Lecture, Dr. John Osae-Kwapong. Dr. Osae-Kwapong has spent the last 10 years working with universities in the area of institutional effectiveness, where his job is to help evaluate programs and services and use data for continuous development. He currently serves as the Associate Vice President for Academic Affairs and Institutional Effectiveness at the University of Philly in Philly, Ohio. Prior to Philly, he worked as the Director for Research and Planning at Columbia University in New York City. He has served in similar roles at 5 other colleges and universities. Before beginning his career in higher education, he worked as a program evaluator and later on as a researcher with different government agencies in the state of Ohio. Dr. Osae-Kwapong has an interest in and passion for teaching. He teaches courses in political economy, comparative politics, research methods, and data analysis. Dr. Osae-Kwapong is a PhD holder in political science from George Mason University, a Master of Public Administration degree from Clark Atlanta University, and a bachelor's degree in political science from Houghton College. Those of us who know him on Facebook knows that he enjoys good food. We all know that he gets upset with referees whenever Chelsea loses a game. And of course, his love for GD food plantain chips. But most of all, he loves his data and he loves his research methods. We're privileged to have him here with us. Speaker, your audience, ladies and gentlemen, your speaker, Dr. John Osae-Kwapong. Could you please all come forward, please? Could we fill up the front seats, please? Kindly.
Those are the back.
Thank you. Those are the back. Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure and a great honor to be here to share with you a few of my thoughts with regards to our democratic experience since 1992. But before I do that, I would like to acknowledge a few people in the crowd. So first of all, I really would like to acknowledge my mom, Mrs. Alice Osae-Kwapong. She's here with us. Thanks for everything. My brother-in-law, Mr. Benkufo, is here as well. My 2 lovely sisters, Oliver and Lillian, are here as well. Thank you for coming. I can't forget my uncle, Dr. Hohine, as well. So thank you for coming. I see 92-94 year group from St. Peter's, my classmates. So thank you for coming. Mr. Evron Hughes is here, popularly known as the Prince of Darkness. Thank you for coming. Pescobar National Association President, Mr. Richard Edim. My house captain, Mr. Fuifiaju. Thank you for coming as well. In fact, I am very grateful to everybody for showing up. To also make this possible, there are a few people I also have to acknowledge for their generosity to help us put this together. So Mr. Francis Prince Ankra, thank you. Mr. Tara Square, thank you for your donation. Mr. Mauli Daker, Mrs. Eliza Osae-Kwapong, Mrs. Juliet Adesina, my father-in-law, Mr. Reid Jampo. Again, thank you to Mr. Kufo for his generous donation as well. I hope I'm not forgetting anyone. Mrs. Marjorie Boafo, up here in the US, thank you as well. Mrs. Esther Dakwa, thank you also very much. So here's what I plan to do over the next couple of minutes. I was going to say the next 1 hour, but not everybody is as crazy about data as I am. And if Juliet Adesina was here, she would start sleeping because she always says data puts people to sleep. But this is a different kind of data. This is the Afrobarometer report. If the Afrobarometer report puts you to sleep, then we may have to look for other reasons besides the fact that data is not interesting and exciting, okay? Afrobarometer just can't put you to sleep. So we'll spend some time talking about Afrobarometer, what has come out of the Afrobarometer, as I look back and try to construct this narrative about what has 4 presidents, 6 elections, 24 years later, what is the sentiment being expressed through such an important survey about our experiences with the transition to democracy. So the plan is to do this. First of all, there are a couple of things that I would highlight on. I'll talk about our satisfaction with democracy, and then I'll talk about elections, and then I'll talk about political parties, institutions. We'll talk about governance outcomes. And in terms of governance outcomes, we'll look at policy preferences, how we've handled national affairs and problems, issues of corruption, and then we'll also look at civic engagement as well. Now, if you look at the nature of the Afrobarometer report, it's extremely comprehensive. It covers almost about 14 different key areas, has about 100 questions in it. So I have to put it out and say, in 1 hour, you can't do enough justice to the Afrobarometer report. But what I can do is to try and construct a narrative based upon some of the key questions and some of the key areas that allows us to reflect on what our experiences has been like. A few remarks about the Afrobarometer report. As of round 6, which was done in 2014, it covers 37 countries, about 76% of citizens, and it's conducted in about 115 languages as well. So it's done in a very non-partisan way. It tries to look at experiences in terms of policy outcomes across all of these countries. The thing that makes Afrobarometer earn my greatest respect is the fact that in this day and age of mobile technology, mobile phones, the internet, where a lot of survey organizations are moving away from the traditional approach to doing surveys and actually using online methods, you have to respect Afrobarometer because they still do the surveys, what we used to say in St. Peter's, the Buga de Calife method, right? Face-to-face, door-to-door, paper, pencil. And to have an organization to put its integrity behind such a method of doing survey is why I put a lot of faith and trust in the Afrobarometer report. But when all is said and done, surveys do have their limitations, right? If you do surveys, you know that you can never 100% capture the sentiments of people. But I look at surveys and I say, it at least sends signals of how people are feeling about certain key issues and certain key questions as it relates to their experiences. So that's how I want us to think through what I am going to share with regards to the Afrobarometer report. This is my framework. This is my framework. So whenever I look at the Afrobarometer report, the signals that I'm looking for is what kind of light bulbs are going up in my head. When I look at the results of a question and I do further and detailed analysis, when the red light goes off, I'm saying to myself, we really need to sit up. When I look at results and a yellow light goes up in my head, I'm saying, good, but there's still room for improvement. When a green light goes up in my head, I say to myself, well, based upon these results, so far so good. And that is the kinds of light bulbs that I want to keep going up in your head as I move through the different graphs of the Afrobarometer report. Do you see red? Do you see green? Do you see yellow? Are there areas that gives you concerns? Are there areas that says to you, we're doing a good job? Or are there areas that says to you, we can do better? So we would start with our satisfaction with democracy. There's a question in there that asks the survey respondents, how satisfied are you with democracy? The other thing I need to mention quickly is that, so the survey has been done in Ghana over 6 rounds, 99, 2002, 2005, 2008, 12, and then 2014. My presentation is looking at the aggregate picture, right? If we put all our 4 presidents together, our 6 elections together, and our 24 years together, what does the aggregate picture look like? And on some of them, yes, I would highlight certain disaggregated information if there are some important things that needs to be highlighted. But when we put it all together, what is the big picture that emerges from this? So if you look at overall satisfaction with democracy, you see that so far, so good with our satisfaction with democracy. You have, are fairly satisfied and are very satisfied. If you combine those numbers together, we're talking about at least 7 out of 10 people, which is the signal that is coming through that suggests that, yes, we like the democratic dispensation so far. Of course, over 6 rounds of the survey, there's been consistently a 1% that says that Ghana is not a democracy. But I think those are just the Negispe people who cannot see what's going on. But yes, so far, in terms of the overall picture, this is how we break out in regards to our overall satisfaction with democracy. Beyond our satisfaction, because sometimes there are frustrations that are expressed in the democratic process, the next question then I looked at is, what is the overall support for democracy as well? And there's a question that asks, should we use democracy as the preferred of government? Should we try and look at other methods? And are there others who are indifferent to it? And again, you see that overwhelmingly, we do prefer democracy as the form of government. So on overall support, there's still that support there. Those of you familiar with Anansi stories, you know that they always say that Anansi used to complain a lot about his wife's cooking, right? But apparently whenever his wife would travel out of town, Anansi would start missing his wife. And no matter how badly the food was, he missed that cooking. It's the same thing with democracy. Every so often when citizens experience some challenges and some dissatisfaction, they start wondering, is there some political alternative to multi-party democracy that we can explore? So in Afrobarometer, there are a number of questions that tries to test this idea of, is there some alternative that we would prefer? And there's a question about what is your level of support then for one-party rule? Again, when you look at that question, you realize that most survey respondents strongly disapprove of one-party rule. The other alternative is military rule. Again, if you look at the survey results, we do strongly disapprove of one-party rule. And then one-man rule is also rejected, which means that if you combine our satisfaction and our support, and you look at the alternatives, if we should say that we do not want a democratic dispensation anymore, that support or that level of support is not there. Actually, if you even look further into the results, even those who say they are dissatisfied with democracy, if you look at the results of that in relationship to their overall support for democracy or other alternative forms of government, they still would prefer that we use democracy as our political arrangement. They still would not give their support to other alternative forms of government. So on that, at least I walk away saying the signal coming through does suggest that even though there are still frustrations and some headaches with regards to how it is all playing out, there is still an overall general support for the transition we've made, 4 presidents, 6 elections, and 24 years later. The next area I want to talk about then is elections. Elections is at the heart of any democratic dispensation. We duke it out, we fight it over, we debate ideas, issues, questions. Ultimately, we settle it, at the polling station. So there's a question that asks, overall, what is our view of elections? And the response options are, elections are completely free and fair with minor problems, free and fair with major problems, not completely free and fair. And again, if you average the results over 6 rounds, this is the overall picture that emerges, which is you are hovering around just an average of about 5 out of every 10 survey respondents who are saying our elections are completely free and fair. And then you do see the sentiments of free and fair minor problems, free and fair major problems. One of the things you would see coming through this is that the results between round 4, 5, and 6, which is 2008, 12, and 14, you do see quite a downtrend in some of those results, right? So when you average it out, sometimes you have to keep that in mind, that the good times and the bad times gives us a general picture, which means that if you want to maintain a certain level of good governance, then overall you want to try and ensure that over a long period of time, you have more good than you have more headaches, more challenges, right? Because if you have one good situation, or maybe like one election in which there's a lot of disputes surrounding it, it can pull down the kinds of sentiments that we express about whether we think the election was free and fair. But overall, this is where we stand in terms of our view of elections. One thing, though, that I must point out here is that when you cross-tabulate this question with which political party you feel close to, you do see that there's a certain partisan flavor to it as well. The thing that I caution against is that even though there's always a certain amount of partisan noise that may emerge around such questions, you should find a way to separate the partisan noise from the real picture to say, perhaps at the end of the day, still you have to find a way to capture, or you have to find a way to improve particularly the number who would say our elections are completely free and fair. And again, please remember, this is survey results, is the signal that is coming through, and therefore my challenge there is, what does it suggest to us? What are the questions that we have to think about and start wondering about? But if we have this sentiment about elections, the next question then is, would we rather choose our leaders any other way? And overwhelmingly, through the survey, we still prefer choosing our leaders through regular, open, and honest elections. So again, even if the signal coming through is not a full green signal, this becomes another consolation point that says, whilst we may have some headaches with elections, we still prefer to choose our leaders that way as opposed to choosing them through some other alternative method. Then there's the question, at least those of us who try to debate politics on social media, every so often you would have that sentiment come through that says, are there any key differences between the two political parties? The two major political parties, are they all the same? Are they different? What sets them apart? Things like that. And there are different opinions on that. There are some who strongly believe that there are key differences between that. There's a question that asks, are voters offered a genuine choice in elections? Never, sometimes, often, always. And again, we are hovering around 5 out of 10 survey respondents. The signal coming through seems to suggest that about half of those who were surveyed think that we do always have a genuine choice in any of our elections so far. And then I love this question, right? Every election time, we hear a lot about so-and-so gave X to person B in village Y, right? Or somebody came to Kwapong and gave me, a pen to do my data analysis with so I could vote for them. And so when this question came up, I said, well, let's take a look at it and see what the survey respondents themselves would say about, are they bribed during elections? So you look at the results. There are some who say never, there are some who say sometimes, there are some who say often, and there are some who say always. So again, I know there's a lot of debate that surrounds how we induce or how we entice our voters. But again, this is how the sentiment breaks out when you pose the question, do we bribe people during elections? Political parties, my favorite group of people, right? Sometimes when I see this picture, I think of my mother. She loves her political party, I tell you, all right? So let's talk about political parties and how they are emerging out of the Afrobarometer survey. The question that is posed is framed as, do you feel close to any particular political party? And not necessarily, for instance, are you a member of the party? Are you a card-carrying member of the party? Things like that. It just is a sentimental thing, right? I could feel close to my friend, Mr. Maulidake, but I may never vote for him in an election. Hypothetically speaking, right? Okay. So when you ask, do you feel close to any particular political party? Almost about 2/3 of the survey respondents say yes. So about almost 70% feel close to a particular political party. But then there is a good 33% on the average over the 6 rounds of the Afrobarometer survey who still keep saying they don't feel close to any particular political party. Now, I know that generates some debate, right? Some of us enjoy partisan politics. Not everybody does. Now, for those who enjoy partisan politics, you start wondering, how is it possible with all of the excitement, in as much as you can even get upset, and sometimes you want to block your friend Dr. Yao Heming because you're disagreeing on something politically, right? It gets your juices flowing. It's exciting. So you sit back and someone says, well, I don't feel close to any party, and you're wondering. You don't get excited about this stuff, okay? But overall, there is still about 1/3 who still say they don't feel close to any political party. The thing I want to point out, though, is that even for those who say they don't feel close to any particular political party, they still vote. There's a question in there that asks, did you vote in the most recent election? And when you do that cross-analysis, yes, about 80% of them still go out there and vote. So they may not feel strongly about the elephant fraternity, or they may not feel strongly about the umbrella fraternity. But on election day, 80% of them will still go out and cast a vote. Once in a while, people talk about a viable alternative to the NDC and to the NPP, right? Two major political parties. So I look at what are the political parties' share of the electoral space. How many people feel close to these parties? So I combine those who indicate that they either feel close to the NPP or they feel close to the NDC. And over the 6 rounds of the survey, 95% of survey respondents. So the signal coming through seems to suggest that we have made our peace with those 2 major political parties. And whilst you still get about 5% feeling close to other parties, it seems that it might be extremely difficult for them to break into that stronghold. One of the things that you end up realizing is that in most multi-party democracies, you always end up with 2 major political parties that have a strong hold on the system. But that's how it's shaped. It's shaped up. I have friends who wish, there was that other alternative that they could look for. All right. How do we feel about political parties? There's a question in there that asks, political parties are divisive, therefore we want fewer of them. And then there's a second statement that says that we need more political parties so that voters have a genuine choice. So think about the previous slide, in which you have 2 major political parties with a huge share of the electoral space, and yet through the same survey, the sentiment coming out is, we could use a few more political parties. So you try and figure out how you reconcile those 2 and how much of the electoral space they can take away from one in which you have 2 that are already dominating it. But when you're asked whether we need more parties or fewer parties, from the survey results, the signal coming through is not saying we need fewer parties. If anything at all, it's saying more parties needed. Which political party do you feel close to? So it's a 2-part question. Afrobarometer says, do you feel close to any particular political party? If you answer yes or no, if you answer yes, then the follow-up question is, which party? And it lists NPP, NDC, all are different political parties. Okay. So on the average, over the 6 rounds, about 54%, the sentiment coming through says, I feel close to the NPP. Another 40-something% says, I feel close to the NDC. And then there's the 5% that feels close to the other political parties. Now, here's the other thing I want to point out. feeling close to a political party and what happens in elections and the outcomes of elections can always be very two different things. So even if you look at the survey results by each of the particular rounds, even though you would see, let's say, for instance, a lot of people saying they feel close to the NPP, you would see that the electoral outcomes in those years does not match the expression of that sentiment in terms of the party that I feel close to. So those are two things you have to find a way to reconcile, which is how I feel about one party and actually what happens in elections and the outcomes of those elections. Because if you look at this picture, it should suggest that our electoral outcomes should look differently than it has looked over the 6 elections that we've had. So that's one thing that I really want to point out. All right. Then the question comes up, the key differences between the parties. Okay. The first top reason that the top reason that those who feel close to a party and other respondents say is the key difference between all political parties, right? NPP, NDC, all the other ones that we have. Their first reason is their economic and development policies. So there are some who would say, if I look at the parties, I can tell them apart based on that. But you also have a good almost 25% on the average from these surveys who end up saying there's no difference. If you look at that, it actually, those who feel close to a political party, that's the first reason they cite, which is it's their economic policies that differs or that sets them apart. Those who do not feel close to any political party, their first reason is that they don't see any difference in the political party. So when you look at that question, you have to think of it also within the context of, are we talking about those who feel close to a party? Because those who do would point out the economic and development policies as what set the parties apart. And then those who take a more non-partisan neutral role are those who would say, we don't see any key difference between them. All right. Institutions. Institutions are at the heart of what we do. The thing I like about institutions is this. So in my role at the University of Findlay, one of the things that students are allowed to do is when you're charged with academic dishonesty, maybe cheating, plagiarism, you're allowed to appeal. You can go to the professor, you can go to the department chair, and then if it's not successful, you come to my office. If you're not successful with my office, you can go to the full Student Academic Standards Committee. I always say this and I operate on this principle. When a student is coming to my office, they may not have the assurance that I would overturn their case. But I want them to have enough confidence and trust to come there to at least seek for a fair adjudication of their case. Now, if they walk away with me saying, your charge still stands or your charge is overturned, they at least have some confidence that I was fair, I was open and transparent about the process, and I did it well. That is what you want institutions to do. I may not always get the result that, for instance, I want from a court. But I need to walk away feeling that the judges who sat on the case treated me fairly. They heard me. They looked at the merits or lack thereof of my case, gave me a verdict, and even if the verdict went against me, I can still walk away saying, the institution did the right thing. When I look at Afrobarometer over 6 rounds, that is my biggest worry, right? The signal that comes through for me is that it's more of a red signal. The question is framed as, do you trust? And we list a number of institutions and we test people's level of trust in those institutions. And what you see emerging is, whether it's the courts of law, when you're asked not at all, just a little, somewhat, a lot, you still don't get over 6 rounds, more than 5 out of 10 people expressing trust in a lot of our institutions. And for me, that is a red signal for me as I think through this data, right? I want to be able to trust my court a lot. If you look at the Electoral Commission, I want to be able to trust my Electoral Commission a lot, right? You're talking about a referee. Those of you who follow me on Facebook will know that I'm always criticizing referees when Chelsea loses, right? It's always the referee's fault, okay? But there are days where when Chelsea loses a game, I walk away knowing that we either played badly, we could have done better, and I can't blame the referee too much. But when the referee makes calls that makes people question the fairness, the appropriateness of those calls, you start to worry. And again, you would see through the next slide, you look at Parliament, your lawmaking body, the people's representatives, those that you go to seek redress of certain public problems. Again, across our institutions, I don't like the level of trust that I see. It gives me some concerns because, again, these are mediating institutions charged with solving very important public problems. And you want a lot more respondents saying they have a lot of trust in these institutions. Let's go back to the ruling party real quick. Okay, so there are two other questions on trust. Every round, the question is asked, do you trust the ruling party? And then there's the question of, do you trust opposition political parties? What happens in those questions, though, is that there is a certain level of partisan flavor in that question, right? If you break down, if you do a deeper analysis of those two questions, when you're in opposition, you don't trust the ruling party. And when you're in the ruling party, you don't trust the opposition, based on the survey results. So here's the worry for me. There will always be those two key actors in any democratic dispensation. And you don't want too much mistrust when you're talking about your key political actors. Because if we can't trust each other, then trying to solve public problems can create a lot more headaches than it necessarily should. Because eventually you would need some amount of compromise when you're trying to resolve public problems. All right. So how do you feel about Afrobarometer so far? These are your different options in terms of your relationship with this data. Do you want to break up with it? You want to commit your future to it by giving it a ring? Those are the things that you have to choose from when you think about these data issues. Okay. I always ask this question, what is democracy good for? Is it good for the procedural things it offers us? Free speech. The fact that every 4 years we can regularly vote in an election. Or is there something more that democracy can give us? So in Afrobarometer, there are a number of governance issues and outcomes, central government performance, policy preferences, that we ask, questions are asked about that, just to see what, quote unquote, we are getting out of this experience. So there are a number of key policy areas where questions are asked. And the first one talks about managing the economy. And the options are very badly, fairly well, very well. Again, this is the aggregate picture. If you look at it over six elections, 4 presidents, 24 years later, this is where we are in terms of how we are managing the economy. Again, the thing I want to point out is that the results from round 6 in 2014, because of because of the sentiment that came through from the survey respondents, pulls the average down. But even generally, if you look at the results year by year, the category that has always appeared the most is fairly well. And even in fairly well, you never get more than 5 out of 10 survey respondents saying the central government is managing the economy very well. It does not sort of suggest that we've not had good times and we've had bad times, but it still says that on certain key issues, you would expect that you would break a much higher ceiling, in terms of how that policy area is being managed. Providing reliable electricity. Of course, this shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone, particularly because of the power crisis that everybody has had a chance to experience over the last couple of years. So again, when the central government is rated poorly on how this policy area is being handled over 6 rounds of this question was asked 3 rounds. Over 3 rounds of the Afrobarometer survey, it surprises no one. The response surprises no one. Fighting corruption. Again, if you average it over 6 rounds, this is the sentiment coming through. And I want you to keep this at the back of your mind because there's a slide that I would get to where I would raise this issue of what is coming out of the survey in terms of the issue of corruption. Water and sanitation services, educational needs, improving basic health services, handling creating jobs, improving standards of living for the poor, and then handling, managing, improving the economy. So again, reducing crime. If you look at all of these policy areas, yes, on the average, you would see in some areas fairly well, in some areas not so much. But the governance outcomes you see around those policy areas still suggest that yes, we put a lot of time and we put a lot of effort and resources. But again, the signal coming through is one of those where I say there's a lot more payoff in terms of the economic rewards that we can get for democracy. Because I think democracy is more than just I can vote, I can speak my mind. Right? You still want some tangible outcomes from democracy. There's a slide I want to show. Okay, one more back on overall view of the country's economic conditions. So there's a question in Afrobarometer that says, rate the country's present economic conditions. If you average it over 6 rounds, this is the picture that emerges. So again, keep in mind, there's a lot of decline in the survey responses between round 5, 2012, and round 6, 2014. So a lot of the results that you see is pulled down by the individual ratings that emerged from the survey in 2014. So you really want to keep that in mind as the context for why the averages look this way. But at the same time and at the end of the day, you still don't get, even in the years where fairly good emerges as your modal category, there are still no more than 5 out of 10 survey respondents saying that. So again, I say to myself, what is democracy good for? Because we need more payoffs from that. There's a question on your personal living conditions. And again, this is the picture that emerges from that as well. Oversight. Someone has to watch someone, right? We have to keep an eye on each other. At home, growing up, my mom had to make sure I did the right thing. And if you didn't, there were consequences for that. Okay? I'm sure we all grew up in households where there were consequences. Secondary school, boarding school. There's a price to pay for either not following the rules or not following the rules. But someone has to be charged with providing that oversight. There are 2 questions on oversight that I want to point out. One has to deal with the president. And the question is framed this way. Once the president is elected, who is responsible for ensuring that the president does his job? And in the first time that the question was asked, it was a split between voters and parliament. The second time the question was asked, the response was, it is the responsibility of voters to make sure that the president does his job. And then in the last round that the survey asked this question, it also put that responsibility on voters. So again, in terms of oversight, but in everyday governance, think about what kinds of avenues are opened to a citizen, right, to provide governmental oversight versus, at least in my thinking, in as much as voters are critical to ensure that the president does his or her job, because I'm sure eventually we would have a female president one day, his or her job, what I see emerging is, I was expecting that Parliament would rank a little higher, because in day-to-day governance, at least you can get the legislature doing, for instance, hearings. You can drag the head of a particular agency to come and answer questions on some policy issues or some problem that has emerged. But this is the picture in terms of oversight. You want to make sure the president does his or her job. The survey is saying it's up to voters to do that. Now, this is what I find interesting. Parliament. who should make sure that Parliament does their job after election. And we are talking about the people's representative. And the question has been asked 4 times. And 3 out of 4 times, the survey results is saying it's up to the president to make sure that Parliament does their job. Now that's very intriguing, because you're talking about the people's representatives, where I would expect that it is actually voters who would make sure that that is what occurs. But what is emerging from the survey, interestingly, it's only on 1 occasion that voters were the ones who emerged as, yes, we have to make sure that our MPs do their job, right? So imagine that. All right, the most important problems. Everybody has problems, individually, nationally. I have my own set of problems. I'm sure my other friends do have. Okay. Now there's a list of problems that are cited, and the question is, which of these problems is the most important one that government should put its resources and its effort to address? Come on. So problem number 1, unemployment. Problem number 2, education. Problem number 3, electricity. 4, managing the economy. 5, infrastructure and roads. Hold on one second. Which problem do you think should be emerging by now as a most important problem to work to? Which problem is not showing up that by now you think it should show up? Because it's a problem that a lot of us are saying is killing us and is undermining governance and democracy. Okay, so keep that in mind. Corruption, right? Problem number 6. Problem number 8, farming and agriculture. Problem number 9, poverty and destitution. Problem number 10, wages, incomes, and salary. I actually shared this information once on social media because I find it very mind-boggling, right? That for all the sentiments expressed, you would expect that if nothing at all, corruption would emerge as one of the top 5 problems in which we should still put our efforts to. Now, I cannot explain why it is looking the way it's looking. When I shared it on social media, some of the responses that I got is, perhaps you have to think of it in relationship to other problems. And that perhaps when I don't have food on my table and I don't have electricity, other problems become less than what I'm facing. But at the same time, if we believe that the issue of corruption undermines our ability to properly address all of these important problems, then there's some reconciliation that we have to do. I still don't have an explanation as to why it is not emerging, but maybe somebody else does. Maybe a lot of you will take a look at Afrobarometer again and see why this picture is looking the way it's looking. All right. So on the topic of corruption, Afrobarometer would list a number of institutions, and the question is framed as, when you look at that institution, how many of them do you think are involved? And it, mind you, is a perception question. How many of them do you think are involved in corruption? The responses are always none, some of them, most of them, all of them. Over the 6 rounds of the survey, the category that always appears the highest is some of them, right? With varying percentages of, well, what percentage of some of them do the respondents say are involved in acts of corruption? So this looks at the generic government officials, okay? 5 out of 10. Judges and magistrates, 4 out of 10. If you focus on some of them, local government, same thing. If you look at members of parliament, that is how it breaks up. If you look at, and the question is framed as the office of the president. So over 6 rounds, that's how it emerges. And then tax officials, that's how it emerges. The police, that's how the picture emerges as well. So again, what you see is, so on the one hand, here we are not bringing the issue of corruption to the very forefront in terms of what are the important problems to handle. based on the survey, so that's a signal that is coming through. And yet, you are also seeing that at least there's a good number that keeps expressing this view that yes, when we look at our key institutions, whether it's parliament, whether it's the police, whether it's courts, that we think that some of them are engaged, in acts of corruption. So again, there's a lot of thinking and there's a lot of reconciliation that we would have to do around this area when we sit back and we reflect over how far we've come in terms of 4 presidents, 6 elections, and 24 years later of this political arrangement called democracy. The last area I want to talk about then is civic engagement. If this thing is going to work, it's not going to be only the efforts of our elected officials, MPs, the president. It's not going to be appointed political officials, right? We all have a role in ensuring that this dispensation will hold for as long as we want it to hold. And so there are a few questions around civic engagement that is asked in the Afrobarometer survey. The one I find very interesting is, how interested are you in public affairs? Because if you are going to engage as a citizen in the public space, then you must be interested in what goes on in the public domain, right? If I want a public solution to a public problem like health, then I have to be interested in what is going on in that public domain. Over the rounds of the survey, when you ask, are you interested in public affairs? This is the sentiment that comes up. Very interested, somewhat interested, not very interested, not interested at all. Now, if you look at the highest qualitative category, 37%, you need a more vibrant public space in terms of civic engagement if you would constantly bring to the attention of elected officials the public problems that you think must be addressed. And therefore, you need a lot more people interested in public affairs. Now, I know that when you think of public affairs, everybody thinks, well, I don't want to have anything to do with politics. And public affairs doesn't necessarily have to be about politics, but there's also a good element of politics involved in that. So I wonder if sometimes those who say, I'm not interested in public affairs, part of that is that they don't want to get caught in the politics of it. But you cannot separate the two. I believe that there's a healthy way of reconciling politics with your interest in public affairs, in trying to ensure that we get the right public solutions to the public problems that we experience and that we face. How often do you describe politics? Or do you discuss politics? For me, I discuss politics every day, right? For most of my friends, it's an everyday thing. But if you look at the results over the number of rounds where the survey has been done, again, you see no more than 4 out of 10 who actually discuss politics, right? So if you're not interested in public affairs and you don't discuss politics, then where does that leave us? Because somebody's got to talk about it. And someone has to put energy around it. And whether it's as individuals or as organized groups, there is a role that we have to play when we look at whether you're interested in public affairs or not and how much you want to discuss politics. All right. Then here's the other thing. So you're not interested in public affairs. You don't want to discuss politics. But in every democracy, you have what I call point of contacts, right? Even if you think about your family situation, when you have concerns, you have problems, you have issues, there are people you go to. You can talk to your mom, you can talk to your dad, you can talk to a friend, you can talk to a cousin. Same thing with democracy. You have a number of key people to whom you can express the concerns in terms of public problems. Afrobarometer has a question that says, in the past 12 months, have you contacted, and they list all of these different people, to discuss any national problem or to bring any problem to their attention? Local government councillor, because the survey is done across several countries, I suspect that this is talking about your assemblyman, right? The person closest to you. Never. 7 out of 10. So the signal coming through to me is this. You want to hold people accountable, but you don't want to contact them. It doesn't work that way. Or how would that work? Unless, of course, there are not avenues through which you can make contact with these key people, right? That perhaps maybe you don't know how to call your assemblyman, write to them, things like that. But again, if you look at point of contact, that is a signal that you're getting that we are a bit disengaged from those we actually put in office, at least as part of civic engagement. Member of Parliament, 86, all right, somewhere about 8 out of 10. Official of a government agency. You have government agencies charged with addressing all sorts of public problems, right? So when something like this, that how then do the bureaucrats, whether they are appointed or whether they are your street level bureaucrats, how then do we get their attention to say you must address X, Y, and Z if there are not avenues to bring the problems to their attention, or even if there are avenues, maybe we are not using those avenues. But again, it's one thing that we have to give some thought to. Political party official, again, that's what you get. But you notice something, whilst you're seeing 7 out of 10, when it comes to do you contact these people and the response is never, the percentage starts to drop when it comes to religious leaders. So think about it. In terms of civic engagement and trying to channel national frustrations as it relates to public problems, you start thinking, who can serve as key points of contact in that? Because in as much as still most people would say, we never contact any of these people, it starts dropping when you ask them, have you contacted your religious leader to bring to their attention a national problem? All right. Then it says, would you join others to raise an issue? Okay. So collective action is always very important. You can't do it alone. You need to join forces with others. There's strength in numbers so that you can bring to the forefront major problems that we think must be addressed. But when the question is asked, would you ask others, would you join others to raise an issue? Yes, no, but I would if there's a chance, and then no, I would never do that, right? So yes, you're talking about 4 out of 10 survey respondents. Again, we are talking of a representative sample of the entire Ghanaian population. But again, if you think about it, you say to yourself, if I wouldn't join others to raise an issue, and I'm not contacting or taking advantage of all the different points of contact in the political arrangement that we have, then how do we bring national problems to the forefront so that those who are either elected, appointed, or have chosen to spend their life in the public service, how do we get them to address important public problems, like the list that has emerged from the survey of health is important, and education is important, and jobs are important. Sometimes you have to do a little alita, right? Secondary school. If you go to the dining hall, was once in a while there was that at St. Peter's. You go to the dining hall, not enough curry or not enough beans, and the boys get upset and everybody starts screaming, yendi. So maybe you get the matron from the kitchen who would come pacify us, maybe add a little more beans or add a little more curry, right? But if you were only one person going out there to shout yendi, nobody was going to join you, right? They might even single you, they would single you out, and then you become the bad person. So sometimes you have to band together to show that it's a collective problem. Collective action is very important. But then when you ask, would you attend a demonstration or a protest march? Almost 7 out of 10 survey respondents say they won't do that. So again, you have to start thinking, how do you then bring to the forefront attention to national problems? If the survey is what it is, and we are not taking advantage of the points of contact, and I don't want to discuss politics, and I'm not interested in public affairs, and I don't want to attend a demonstration or a march, then what are we left with? Right? Yes, maybe we are left with Facebook. You're right. Maybe Facebook is a way. And interestingly, these days, you actually do see a number of our government officials on Facebook. So maybe Facebook. But again, there's a question that asks, where do you get your news from? And in as popular as the internet has been, radio still comes up as the source of news for most people, whether even it's in the urban area or it's in the rural area. So another thing to keep in mind. All right. So for me, I say, where do we go from here? 4 presidents, 6 elections, 22, 24 years later. What's the way forward? I think we've made our peace, I think, based on Afrobarometer. And I love Afrobarometer and I trust Afrobarometer. So the sentiment coming out seems to suggest that we've made our peace with democracy. 7 out of 10, satisfaction, good enough. Alternatives, we still reject one-man rule, one-party rule, all of that. Governance outcomes, a lot of work to be done. And I say that because I'm one of those people who believes that if I can vote every 4 years, but I end up hungry, can't feed my family, can't pay tuition, all of those things, once in a while, it forces you to rethink what it is that you're getting from this political dispensation. Which is why, for me, I think that in as much as you work hard to strengthen the things that makes democracy work, elections, institutions, you still need tangible results. Because no matter what, when I go to the market and I'm offered a price of, I'm offered a finger of plantain at a particular price, the first thing that I think of is, if I find it unaffordable, who would I think of in terms of why I'm facing that? I would trace it back to how my political arrangement either works or does not work. And you start wondering, okay, something has to be done. But again, for me, the thing that is reassuring is that it still shows that democracy, yeah, we like it. We don't seem to suggest that we want to get rid of it. But it has to start giving us some payoffs, some real payoffs, in terms of the everyday bread and butter issues. I can't read all of that quote there, but in that quote, what the author was getting at is what I'm trying to also get at is, if 4 presidents, 6 elections, and 24 years later, we don't once in a while want to have maybe something like regret, or maybe why did we even do this, all of that, which I don't think we are there, because again, the survey result shows that we like this. Then we would have to start thinking more seriously about how we resolve a lot of national public problems. Because this semester in my institution, I taught a course in comparative politics. And strangely, once in a while, my students, as we would look at how different countries are doing, once in a while they would say, what does it really matter the type of political arrangement you have, right? They would say, at the end of the day, people want basic bread and butter things. So does it matter who is offering it to them? And we still ended up saying, democracy still is a preferred alternative to the other forms. But if democracy is still going to enjoy the kind of legitimacy that it enjoys, then it cannot brag about the fact that every 4 years I can vote, or that I can speak freely. Democracy would have to brag about other things, and those other things would have to be bread and butter issues, right? I have to see that the economy is working. I have to see that I can afford a decent life. And if I can't, I would start wondering, is democracy living up to its promise? And on that note, I want to say, I don't want to be the only one in love with Afrobarometer, right? I want others to fall in love with the Afrobarometer report. That's their website. Spend some time, look at it. You may find things that I haven't found. You may look at things in different ways that I haven't looked at. But when all is said and done, I still think that it's a very, very important piece. The kind of information that is contained in the Afrobarometer report is very rich. that for me, it sparks a lot of questions and conversations that can help us a lot as we think of what our experiences have been like over the last 24 years. And I would strongly encourage you, those of you who are interested in, in the public space, I would strongly encourage you to spend some time with Afrobarometer. Afrobarometer is not jealous, right? It loves more people. So please do that. And on that note, you've proven to me that data can be exciting. So I'm very grateful for your attention. And God bless you all. The last thing is, so my university gave me a number of t-shirts. Not for propaganda purposes, no, but for marketing purposes. There's a difference between marketing and propaganda. So this is for marketing. So I'm marketing the University of Findlay in Findlay, Ohio. So here's what we're going to do. We had people throw their names into a bowl. We only have 10 t-shirts. So we would randomly, in an open, transparent manner, would randomly select 10 winners. We don't need polling agents because we trust each other. And I assume the role of the EC, and I'm very fair. So, do we have the bowl with the names? Okay, so we need somebody who would randomly draw one after the other. And you can have a nice University of Findlay t-shirt. And whenever you look at that t-shirt, I want you to think fondly about the University of Findlay. And if you know people who want to come and study in the US, again, this is marketing. Please send them to the University of Findlay. Mr. Ebron Hughes, I saw your hand up.
No, sir.
You're okay?
I was going to get out to some history.
Well, that wouldn't be anything new. That wouldn't be anything new. Are we drawing?
Promise transparency now. Is that transparent?
It is, but you can see the people, so it's very transparent.
You don't know them.
We are trying to be its biggest right.
See, you can see the bowl, right? And you can see the papers.
It's already hiding there.
No, and it was not pre-filled. Okay, Mr. Mauli Dake, will you do us the honor and draw the first name? Oh, what are the odds? From St. Peter's Secondary School. So, Mr. Fifiaju, my mom brought the t-shirt, so you would have yours, yes. I'll draw the second name. But the EC is allowed to vote, right? Samuel Owusu. Yes, so Samuel Owusu, you get a University of Findlay t-shirt. Mr. Joseph Obe from St. Peter's. No, this is not red. I promise. It is really not red. Ama Bohema.
She's married to someone from
Maybe she might. Oh, Ama Bohene. Yes. Oh, she's my, by the way, she's my cousin. Ama is my cousin. So we have one now. We have four now. Okay. Ama is my cousin. I promise this thing is not red. We have four. Ten.
No, it's not.
Nana Ofuriata.
Nana Ofuriata. Oh, okay. See, I don't even know him. So this goes to show you that this thing is not great. Ben Boy from St. Peter's, I think. He just stepped out, yes, Chestu, yes, he's from St. Peter's.
He's left.
Oh, he's left? Oh, then his vote can count.
Yes.
So, as the EC, I declare his vote invalid.
You should have said the protocol to start.
Perpetual Mensah. I actually did national service with her in the Western region about 20 years ago.
Friends and family.
Friends? No, this is not friends and family, I promise. It's a mere coincidence.
So let me just drew and Sandra Osae-Kwapong.
Yes, Sandra Osae-Kwapong. That's my little sister.
That sounds very funny.
You know, I'm very troubled by this because it reinforces some notions we hold about the way things work. But I promise, this is not family and friends.
No.
Oh, why? Okay, so how many do we have now? 8. Okay, we need 2 more. There will not be overvoting, I promise. She's one of my nieces. Okay, now let's draw the last name. Hopefully it will be somebody who is neutral.
Okay, who is going to?
Let mommy draw the last name. Oh, okay, then give it to everyone. If you trust him. No, that is unacceptable. She's my friend and my mentee, and I've been helping Amma with her research methods. So it's 90% friends and family. But at least we did it openly and transparently. That's the difference. On that note, thank you so much. Hopefully, this won't be the end of this conversation around Afrobarometer and other important questions of governance and democracy. And we got, as a result of the sponsorship, we were able to arrange a few drinkables and chewables. So please, be our guest, yeah? And then we can have conversations as we drink a little bit. It's what you guys call identity. Yes. So, thank you so much. It's been a great pleasure.